So today we're going to be talking about when you're building an Airtable. Often we see different companies or different sizes of teams. They start with one use case, but as we're building that one use case, how do we think about the bigger picture in mind? Because oftentimes, like, you're just starting with maybe one program out of a portfolio. Kelly, hopefully I'm saying that properly, but you're starting with one program and it's kind of like a proof of concept. And so you want to make sure it's going to be scalable later on to these larger teams. So today, that's what we're going to be talking about. I have Kelly Williams here, our Director of Client Experience at Optimize IS. Kelly, if you want to give a brief intro, and then we can jump into it.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. I've been with Optimize a couple of months, but I've been using Airtable since 2020. I did manage a security PMO within a publicly traded communications company and built out project program portfolio management. And that's where we started. And then it grew into budgeting. It grew into people development of our team. It grew into OKRs. So that's very relevant to how, we started with a use case that was going to be it. And then things just kept going over time.
Yeah. So Kelly, you've been on a lot of our big projects recently, whether it's like uh, in tech. I can't go into detail about each company, but like in the tech industry or in the networking industry. So we've seen a lot of these different use cases where a team comes to us and they're like, I want project management for this specific project, or I want to build a communications tracker for this specific team or this niche. So as we're building those, what we want to talk about today is when we're building those individual use cases, how do we keep the big picture in mind to make sure it's scalable?
Yep, very much. I think there's a couple keys, and one is very data related, and one is very people related. So the people aspect is who are we building this for today, but who might care later, right? Like if we're thinking of a workflow or an approval system or a project management system that we're building in with one team, that's great. But what happens when somebody higher than the team cares? So like understanding where things may grow to, even if you are 100% sure that nope, I'm the only team that's going to be using Airtable and this is the only thing, this is the problem that we're going to solve. Taking that like little bit of time to think of where data might have to go later is really important. And then the other pieces are, okay, what are our standard inputs, right? So if I think of a project, like there's a lot of things that like we're always going to have people. We're always going to have, where I worked and we did the data security for products. I had a list of products, so when I built, all of those things lived in my ecosystem and in my base because it was me and this was the only problem we were ever going to solve. Well, then as other people started expanding and other teams were using Airtable for either different projects or similar problems like PMO management, now we have the same or other teams creating a list of people, creating a list of products. We had different methods for the way we said not started or planned, and we didn't have the same statuses aligned. And so then we started bringing things together for the big picture for our COO. We had to unravel some things and move where people were like that, those data points were created, move where we pulled in information for the product list because it was in too many places and we couldn't bring it all together. So that also, once we fixed that, it was less like it was less data sprawl, but it was also like less manual input by other people. But planning for that, like if I would have acknowledged at the very beginning that if I keep the people over here or I keep this here, and then we know other teams are going to need to resource that same point of data, it wouldn't have been a whole, at the time for me not being, having to manage the PMO and also like build an Airtable, it took me quite a long time to unravel that so that other teams could use that same data.
Yeah. So we're going to do a little bit of a rapid fire on a few different use cases for this. So I think the most explicit one, the clearest one for me for almost every use case on basically keeping this piece of verified data is the table of users or a table of people. Oftentimes, and this is still a case by case basis, but I think it's the most common example of this, we're going to keep that in a different base and sync it to everywhere we need. Would you agree that's like most commonly?
That is the best way to do it.
Yep. So,
Now, I think a key point is that someone, I might need different fields,
hmm,
like aside from what is like sync to me into my base. But that's the great thing is I can add additional fields and wrap additional data around it. But I'm not retyping Ben Green. I'm not retyping Kelly Williams.
yep.
That is just there and available for me.
Yeah. So people I see as the top one. If I looked at let's say a marketing department, I think you have a great perspective of like the portfolio program. So what would be some data sets at that level that you'd be storing as like a verified data set that multiple teams could pull from?
Yeah, I think like a tying to objectives is big and key here
Hmm.
because there's a reason for that program or that portfolio, and it's probably to tie to a company objective, which could be to grow into a new market base, or grow into new users. And so, somewhere somebody needs the reference of that information to be able to tell the story. So knowing what those items are and being able to pull it in and relate to it, I think is really important at the program and portfolio level.
Yeah. So another one I've seen at in tech companies, or I guess in a few different industries, is a list of like products. Oftentimes, products are like they're standard more or less, or like they're a shared data set that has like multiple attributes about it. So I think would that be another good example of this?
Definitely. Where I worked, we had more products than I truly realized when I when I started. I thought there was a couple because there were some like I'll say like big brands, but then there was some products below that and like definitely feature sets. And from the data security perspective, we needed to know what project related to a product. But the same is with like marketing campaigns, like here's a new feature or an entirely new product. There's going to be a whole campaign around that, and you need to know how it relates.
Hmm.
And there's no reason to one like have to create that list, but then also have to go somewhere else to get maybe some of the data around that product, right? Marketing really cares when's that product going to be like GA, and they need some of this information, and that it can come to them without recreating it because it's in that verified data set or publicly shareable. Publicly, I mean within the ecosystem. Again, we're taking out a manual step so that people can move faster through their workflows.
Yep. Let's jump to a different industry. Let's talk about retail. So if I think about retail, maybe there's like a master list. Like my dad works at Kroger, for example, and at Kroger they have all of these different like group things like regionally or at the national level to where like there's these different brands, but then there's like I assume there's a master list somewhere, hopefully in Airtable. I have a dream that it's an Airtable somewhere, but hopefully in Airtable there's a list of every single store that Kroger has, or every single store, every single fuel center that Kroger has. Would that be another good example?
Very much like having to again know that or recreate it or know that a new store is going to be
Mm-hmm.
built in a different geography. Again, I just think of it's 2024, and I could almost say that the biggest problem still in a lot of companies is information silos. And yes, there are a lot of pieces of data that should not be shared and accessible, but there's more that should be shared that there's not quite that mechanism to do it right now.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've ran out of my industries. Do you have any other industries on and an idea of what data set they would use?
Yeah, I mean, I even think of I'm trying to think of like there's got to be a training use case also, right?
Hmm.
Um, like a service delivery company that has maybe a new something new coming out, and you need the people out in the field to know about it and get training towards it. I guess not necessarily a new industry, but it's also a different use case of like things that need to be available and shared, and just different ways of communicating and learning. I think all again like it can all be like if it's not siloed, if it's in a way that we can share it out, then people can take the advantage of it and expand upon it.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is like we may have a customer where we're working with a product team or a marketing team, and they're coming up with certain like training material, but that information would be super useful for a sales team. And so we're trying to build like whatever way we're going to build the for the product or marketing team, if they're creating any trainings around the products, that however we're building it, it's going to easily be able to scale when we end up building some sort of like sales enablement tool.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's some of the things that you get with making sure we're building for the big picture.
Very much. I
And
remember being back in IT sales and either looking through, a shared file system or others with whatever right keyword I could get. And hopefully it was this year's version of the training materials and not something that was like tagged 14 times from 3 years earlier. So it's another like way to make sure you're sharing out the most relevant information.
yeah, yeah. Uh, I don't think we can talk about this yet, but there's also some cool features that are coming out later this month around, I would say, building a template is, I guess, maybe the extent that we can say it. Kelly and I were actually demoing this functionality yesterday, but building a template and making it scale to multiple bases. So Airtable has some cool stuff coming out around that we will keep our lips zipped on. Um,
Awesome. Well, Ben, I really appreciated talking with you about individual use cases. I think a next interesting topic would be stakeholder buy in. And I just want to tell our audience that you can click on the link. It's either here or here. And then you can hear more about that. And that's our next subject.
awesome. Thank you, Kelly.